Had to get out of that conventicle, if you know what I mean. So here we are at Oxford, the very place where John Wesley was ordained a minister in the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church. Wesley was born in 1703. This is, of course, 20 years after the beginning, really, of Pietism in Germany. And he grows up in a traditional Anglican household and goes on to be a priest in the Anglican Communion. And let's jump into his life and his theology. As you've probably realized, some reforms in the Christian church happen within the church, and other times there is a separation of church groups. For instance, the Pietistic movement within Lutheranism happens within the Lutheran Church, and the English separatists break off from the Anglican Communion and come to America as the Pilgrims. John Wesley's Reformation is going to be one of those reformations that happens within the church. Wesley was an Englishman. He was heavily influenced by Arminian and Pietistic thought. You might say, what is Arminianism? Let's talk about that really quickly. Jacobus Arminius was a Dutch Calvinist theologian that didn't like Calvinism. And he developed a theology that would be in stark opposition to the 5 points of Calvinism. Now, the 5 points of Calvinism were actually better defined because of Arminius, remarkably. But to make a long story short, he argued this. Firstly, all people are completely sinful, so he does not reject initial depravity and thus avoids the sin of the heretic Pelagius that says we are unencumbered by sin and can either choose Christ or choose sin. He made this argument back in the 300s, and Augustine shut him down. Bless you, Augustine. And some of you probably accidentally agree with the heretic Pelagius, not recognizing that the actual position that your church teaches, if they teach a position similar to this, is actually Arminius's. Some have accused Arminius of semi-Pelagianism because some of what he teaches is somewhat similar to Pelagianism. Calvin claimed that all are totally depraved, and only God jumps in and from his own divine sovereign will chooses to save some, and there's nothing that we can do about it. Arminius, on the other hand, says all people truly are born in sin. At least that's half the story. But the other half of the story is that God extends his grace to every single human being. But this is not a salvific grace. Rather, this is the grace that frees them up so that they can choose. So sure, you are born with original sin, and Jesus died on the cross, not to save everyone, but to give everyone a choice. You can either accept the grace of God in its entirety for salvation, or you can choose to reject it. And then the next point that Arminius makes is that human beings, if they so choose, are able to resist sin through God's grace. So you choose Jesus, and then you continue to resist sin. And this is possible according to Arminius. And Wesley will take that a few more steps. Wesley comes to maturity and gives a great deal of voice to what will become known as the First Great Awakening. This happens in England, and it happens to a very large extent in the New England colonies. Now, radical changes were happening at this time. Previous to this time, Christians met for Mass or the divine service or to hear the true preaching of God in church buildings where an ordained minister, whether you're Catholic, Orthodox, Lutheran, Anglican, it didn't matter. Even the Quakers met in a church building. With the growth of Pietism and the belief in personal revelation, now anyone could speak for God. And gatherings could take place not in church buildings, but out in the open. Wesley, at first, wasn't a big fan of these open-air preaching revival get-togethers, but ultimately he comes around to see these as good. Additionally, non-ordained, non-trained ministers could get up and speak. And this caused a lot of people to feel deep in their hearts Jesus. Now, the Anglican Church did not accept all of what this great awakening was asserting. Firstly, the Anglican Communion said it's only proper to have those who are called into the vocation of minister to be actually ministering. And so preachers must be ordained ministers. The other side of that is you tend to get less heresy that way. We've already talked about these 4 ways quite a few different times. I'm not going to talk a whole bunch about this here, but Wesley is the one who sort of officially brings this personal experience element into a large, powerful denomination, the Anglican Communion. Now, Wesley had been an ordained minister. He had gone to America and preached, But it wasn't until he read Luther's commentary on the book of Romans that he felt that he was personally saved. He said, "I felt my heart strangely warmed. I felt I did trust in Christ, Christ alone for my salvation." And so he feels his heart being warmed, and it's at that moment that he knows that he is truly a Christian, he goes on later to say. And so where is salvation found then for John Wesley? It's not in the objective sacraments of the ancient church, of Orthodoxy or Catholicism. It's not in one's baptism or in the promises in the Eucharist or in the promises of absolution after confession. It's not in the divine sovereign will of God like it was for Calvin. Now it is rooted in the deeply personal experience of the conversion. To be fair to Wesley here, he would rate that personal experience belongs at the bottom of the quadrilateral in determining theology, but he does officially create a place for it. Now, he wasn't the first one to do this. The Quakers had been doing this before, and the Separatists. But from the view of Christianity broadly, Wesley brings this into what might be called, at the time anyway, respectable religion. Wesley is going to get himself into some trouble with the Calvinists as he, on his sermon, Freedom of Grace, attacked the Calvinistic understanding of predestination. He went so far as to condemn it as, quote, blasphemous, and said that Calvin's God is a God who is, quote, worse than the devil. Many of you have grown up in a tradition that emphasizes personal experience, maybe even personal experience in terms of conversion. This is why some groups of Christians today emphasize giving one's testimony. My guess is many of you also have not been brought up with the more Protestant, the historic Protestant understanding of predestination, but rather have more of a Wesleyan understanding of conversion. That is, as Arminius said, God frees us up in Christ in order to be able to choose. And it's that choosing that saves us or damns us. I made the joke earlier that John Wesley will bring holiness to Christianity. Well, here's what he does. John Wesley looked around and recognized that he was really holy, and there were a lot of other Christians who were not as holy. And he argued that Christians who were truly holy could come to a perfect state of love, where you have a perfect love for God and a perfect love for your neighbor, where Christ's perfect love reigns in our hearts, and we therefore can achieve Christian holiness. In fact, Wesley was such a big believer in this, he started a club called the Holiness Club. How can we willfully and intentionally avoid sin and never sin again and be perfect? Well, John Wesley said, we can fulfill the law of love. Jesus said that we were to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. Good news, you can do this, and you should. Try harder until you're perfect, and then you don't have to worry about it. You're good. You have to keep being perfect. You don't get to stop, but I mean, you can get there. And this is called sanctification. To be sanctified is to be made holy. And you do this, once again, by following the law of Christ. Love God, love one another. Okay, Mr. Cook, you might say that's somewhat interesting. We learned about a guy named Wesley. We learned a little bit about the First Great Awakening. Personal experience finds its place in very well-established religious circles. Good old-fashioned revivals happening, old-fashioned going back to the 1700s anyway. But what does this mean for us here today? It means if you want to be a Wesleyan, you can join one of two large denominations. You can either become a Nazarene or you can become a Methodist. The Methodist Church has a large worldwide impact. So that's the one we're going to focus on really, really quickly today. The United Methodist Church is a fairly large communion. It's recently agreed that they would split. The United Methodist Church has been greatly influenced by modern liberal Protestant theology, and we'll be learning about that next. And so has opened itself up to things such as homosexual marriage, alternative lifestyles, so on and so forth. However, because of their missions work, there's a large number of Methodists in Africa. And the Africans are still reading what it talks about sexual morality in the Bible and taking it seriously. And so anytime you have a worldwide Methodist gathering in order to make denominational decisions, it's always been the African bishops that have held the United Methodist Church from embracing the social issues, the modern social issues that the other mainline Protestant denominations have embraced. Presbyterian Church USA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Episcopal Church in America, the United Church of Christ, all of these have embraced homosexual ordination, homosexual marriage, providing abortions for their clergy on demand, paid by their health plans for their clergy. But the United Methodist stubbornly has held out. Why? Africans. And so the United Methodist Church in the United States has basically very recently, like in the last couple of months, agreed that the Africans can kind of split off and do their own thing so that the Americans can embrace all forms of deviancy. America. And just when you thought that it couldn't get any better, let's look at an advertisement here for the United Methodist Church, narrated by none other than Darth Vader. Take it away, James Earl Jones.
What if we rethink church? What if church was less about Sunday and more about the other days of the week? What if church wasn't just a place we go, but something we do? A menu of adventure, an active verb instead of a noun. What if church wasn't just a building, but thousands of doors, each of them opening up to a different concept or experience of church, so that whoever knocks might find a journey to call their own? What if church was the way church was in the beginning? Outbound, unbound, active. Human beings from completely different worlds, united by common purpose, experience, and belief, creating real solutions for their daily lives. What if church looked at itself with seeker's eyes, recognizing that even the smallest step through one of our doors is an act of courage, a moment of vulnerability? That solving a secular need can lead to spiritual interaction. That social relationships can offer opportunities for discussions of faith and provide inspiration for discovery. And that for a skeptical world, actions often do speak louder than words. What if church was more of an out-of-church experience? An opportunity to prove what we say we believe with our lives. Then, perhaps Sunday could be a day of rest and reflection on all that we had accomplished Monday through Saturday. What if we rethink church? Not in terms of what it is, but what it could be. And what if we can convince the world to do the same? Together we can open hearts, open minds, and open doors. The people of the United Methodist Church.
So there you go. If you see a church on the side of the road that has the word Methodist in it, United Methodist, it's the largest denomination of Methodists in the world. The congregants at this point tend to be pretty elderly, as it's really in the 1800s that the Methodist Church experiences a massive explosion of growth, becoming probably the most significant, largest religious group in the United States during that century. It's been on the decline really for about the last 120 years. So John Wesley embraces Arminian theology, embraces pietistic understandings of holiness, started a club called the Holiness Club, and his brother wrote hymns. Actually, his brother is a great hymn writer, Charles Wesley. Charles Wesley's hymns are really quite good. Love divine, all loves excelling, hark the herald angel sing. And this next one that we'll be looking at to conclude our examination of Methodism. It's one of my all-time favorites. And so let's look at this hymn by Charles Wesley. Lo, he comes in clouds descending.